Hello, Ms. Wallace. Nice to see you. It's good to be back. Just another Tuesday, right?
Just another Tuesday after just another Saturday, right?
That's for sure. Well, I'm wide awake. No worries. Thank you.
Is not for the faint of heart. Luckily, Office Depot Office Max is here to take care of you. Taking care of business. With print services. Done right, on time, guaranteed. Expert tech support. And this week, shop our paper event and save on Boise Case paper for just $29.99. Plus, get your Office Depot paper subscription. Subscribe at OfficeDepot.com/subscriptions. Office Depot Office Max.
Taking care of business. I never dreamed that I'd meet somebody like you.
Good evening, Chuck. Now, do I owe you 25 seconds somehow, someday?
Nah, take it. Just take it. You'll need it.
Take it, need it, use it. Thank you, Chuck Todd. Tonight, Rex Tillerson got canned after his famous moron critique of Donald Trump, returning the favor here and firing him via tweet. But this is not all personal drama tonight. Rex Tillerson leaving with a Russia warning today, and all eyes on this incoming Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. What will he do on some of these big issues that affect all of our national security, North Korea, Russia, and these increasing diplomatic strains over Donald Trump's tariff policy? I can tell you Tillerson's ousting began today with something that has been kicking around, and this is kind of funny. Chief of Staff John Kelly basically gave a warning that there was a tweet coming. Now, the State Department then thought, reportedly, that this meant there was some kind of Donald Trump attack, but not an impending firing. Here is how New York Times reporter Gardner Harris recounted this odd bit of presidential stagecraft today and a message that was lost in translation.
The White House people are sort of telling us, look, Kelly called him. Kelly gave him a heads up. The State Department people are telling us Tillerson didn't really get that message. I think what we're hearing Kelly told him is you're going to get a tweet. Tillerson sort of felt like I think he'd been here before, that he would weather this storm.
You're going to get a tweet, I guess it is part of the job duties of the Chief of Staff now. And that wasn't all. A Tillerson aide then today pushed back on the White House spin and found himself fired too. Now, Tillerson chose today to speak up on substance as well and on how the Trump administration must counter what he calls Russia's troubling behavior.
Much work remains to respond to the troubling behavior and actions on the part of the Russian government. Russia must assess carefully as to how its actions are in the best interest of the Russian people and of the world more broadly. Continuing on their current trajectory is likely to lead to greater isolation on their part.
That was big today, and it comes a day after Tillerson took a harder line than Trump, saying the poison that was used on this former spy in the UK came from Russia and should trigger a response. As for the replacement, it's CIA Director Mike Pompeo. He's also been a subject in this Russia probe. In January, we learned Mueller's team interviewed him. He'd been in a meeting where Trump reportedly asked for help pressuring, yes, Jim Comey to drop the Russia investigation. He was also described as a peripheral witness to then the very firing of Jim Comey. Now, Pompeo has warned that the Russians will likely target the U.S. again, but his own agency had to correct him after he was perceived as downplaying the entire impact of Russian meddling.
The intelligence community's assessment is that the Russian meddling that took place did not affect the outcome of the election.
That wasn't quite right. They didn't say that if the Russians had an impact on the outcome of election would go one way or the other. The CIA famously clarified their own director's remarks. Now, the Mueller probe also moving forward tonight. I want to read you something pretty unusual. The judge in the case overseeing charges against Paul Manafort says he is now a flight risk because he faces, quote, the very real possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. All of this unusual staffing is coming at a time where you have one situation that is more normal. This would happen, I think, probably at most workplaces. If you let it be known in public you think your boss is a, quote, moron, you're not going to have a lot of job security.
Did you address the main headline of this story that you called the president a moron? And if not, where do you think these reports or ideas are?
I'm not going to deal with petty stuff like that.
I am joined for this conversation by Bill Richardson, a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Michael McFaul, a former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Evelyn Farkas, Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary, and Katty Kay, anchor for BBC World News America. It is a big night, and we have the kind of titles I could only dream of in global diplomacy. What I want to do with each of you is basically go around the horn. I don't always do it this way, but let me ask one big question and go in order, starting with Katty Kay. What is important about both how these staffing changes came about and what they will do to U.S. policy in the world?
I think what's important in terms of America's relationships with both its allies and its adversaries is that this sense of chaos in the White House throws relationships off balance. We have diplomats time and again telling us they don't need to know how to deal with this White House, and this kind of chaos is just a part of that. The thing that will change now is whether Mike Pompeo, in lockstep with President Trump in a way that Rex Tillerson simply wasn't, makes American foreign policy more hawkish on the key issue of Iran, notably, potentially on North Korea. And it does seem that Mike Pompeo is more hawkish on Russia than Rex Tillerson had been recently, or than the president has been recently. And so we'll see if that changes too.
Evelyn.
So I would say the first thing, Ari, is that the way this happened is highly unconstructive, and it didn't need to come down this way. You know, just suddenly firing Tillerson out of the blue means a lot of people around the world are trying to figure out what to do. I spoke to a Japanese diplomat today who said his foreign minister is coming to town on Friday. So, you know, if you had a normal process, you would have a phase in, phase out, and you could deal with problems like that much more quickly and rationally. And the other thing is, of course, for the Japanese, they're right in the middle of trying to figure out how they fit into this U.S.-North Korea bilateral negotiation, which may or may not occur in May.
Michael.
So on the style, this is incredibly undignified, of course, to be fired by a tweet. And just to remind everybody, Secretary Tillerson is not on Twitter. He was just here at Stanford a couple weeks ago and told us all he does not have a Twitter account.
Well, now you're making me jealous of him. I can't tell you how much time I waste on Twitter, Ambassador.
You and me both. On the substance, I'd say two things. One is Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis did a lot of business together in checking some of the more impulsive ideas that came from the president. How does that balance of power within the administration now change? We'll have to wait and see, but I think it will change. On the big substantive thing, let's just all remember the policy that we were talking about 5 days ago. President Trump has just launched the most important diplomatic initiative, maybe in decades, with the North Koreans. And in midstream, he's now changing his team. His lead diplomatic person, he just changed. And Mr. Pompeo may have a lot of experience with the substance. He has almost zero experience with diplomacy. So as he goes into the Super Bowl, he just changed the quarterback.
Right, and a quarterback who has more experience than almost anybody in dealing with North Korean diplomatic negotiations at a high level is Bill Richardson. So, Bill, speak to the ambassador's point. I will put out, of course, what the White House has argued in rebuttal, which is that it is precisely because you're heading towards high-level goals in North Korea and elsewhere that you need a Secretary of State who has the confidence of the president, and the relationship had degraded. Your view of that and what's on the horizon in North Korea generally, sir?
Well, my concern is the unceremonious way the Secretary of State was ousted, not just on policy, but it was obvious that they didn't have a personal chemistry. My concern is North Korea and Iran. The president has to decide May 12th whether he keeps the Iran nuclear deal. I hope he does, because it is related to North Korea. I think if he cancels the Iran nuclear deal, the North Koreans are going to say, well, what are we going to do? Can we trust the president if policy changes with new administrations? But with North Korea, I would hope the administration considers delaying the summit a month or so, because Pompeo, the Secretary of State-to-be, needs to be confirmed. He needs to be gotten up to speed. He knows intelligence. He's a smart man if you're #1 at West Point. But he doesn't know Asia. He doesn't know diplomacy. He doesn't know the Foreign Service, foreign policy, diplomacy. I hope that he does change Secretary Tillerson's policies so that our ambassadors come back, our Foreign Service people come back, people like Ambassador McFaul. Not that I'm saying he should come back, it's up to him. But, you know, they've been uncomfortable, the career people that are essential in this new policy towards North Korea to prepare a coherent strategy that we don't have with North Korea.
Well,
so
I don't want to.
Those are my worries.
I don't want to make light, but I will. Ambassador McFaul now has one of the key variables for getting a Trump administration job, which is being on TV a lot. You know, we didn't write these rules, but they do exist. On a more serious note, Ambassador, I will show you a side-by-side that the producers at The Beat here put together that is fairly devastating about the way the Trump administration is dealing with what is the accumulating evidence about this hit, this potential assassination regarding Russia. Take a listen.
We're going to be speaking with the British today. We're speaking with Theresa May today. And as soon as we get the facts straight, if we agree with them, we will condemn Russia or whoever it may be.
The government has concluded that it is highly likely that Russia was responsible. Either this was a direct act by the Russian state against our country, or the Russian government lost control of its potentially catastrophically damaging nerve agent and allowed it to get into the hands of others.
Michael McFaul, what do you see in that contrast?
Well, even the Prime Minister, I think, was offering up some wiggle room. They got, you know, they lost control of their nerve agents. That's inconceivable to me, but she at least had some wiggle room. But she was pretty defiant and obvious that this was the Russian government that carried out this assassination attempt, if we're being generous, terrorist attack if we're not. President Trump was not quite ready to go that far.
Evelyn, there's so much news coming out here. I want to bounce over to the CIA issues because the vacancy there from the way that Donald Trump did this. And I want to put up on the screen Gina Haspel here, who would be the new CIA leader. She reportedly worked with the plot, the plan to destroy the videos that were made of that. You know, a lot of discussion about obstruction in the Trump era. There are people who look back at that history as potential obstruction for getting to the bottom of who did what and why regarding those detainees in that Bush era. And so I wonder your analysis of something that I think many people have said is a good thing. For the first time, a woman running the CIA, that's great, and she's clearly done her service, but also what many see as a blot on that record.
Yeah, Ari, I was working up in the Senate during that time period. I think there are a couple additional data points that have come out. Apparently, according to one of the papers, Dianne Feinstein had blocked Gina Haspel, her promotion earlier at some point during the Trump tenure. And or maybe even before that, but she was supposed to be promoted to the head of the clandestine service, I believe, and she was blocked in the Senate. And then today, Senator McCain tweeted out saying, I hope she gets a close look. And I do think, I mean, that is an era, that is a time period where there now, whether she was considered a line agent or not is obviously up to your perspective on it. But certainly she should answer questions in closed and then in open hearings.
And I think that goes to what the hearings have to accomplish, which is important. I want all of you to stay with me. Joining The Beat tonight, a very special guest, NBC News special correspondent, Tom Brokaw, who has been following this news. Mr. Brokaw, your view of what this means and why, as several diplomatic guests have mentioned tonight, it seems so unusual and unceremonious.
Well, I may have what may be a contrary point of view. There may be some coherence now to what passes for foreign policy in this administration, because for some time, dating back to when the Secretary of State called the President a moron, there has obviously not been a relationship there. The Secretary of State the other day was talking about how we were going to try to work out a relationship and an approach to North Korea. At the same time, the President was talking about, yeah, I'm ready to go. I've been talking to folks who know Mike Pompeo well, And with all due respect to Ambassador Richardson, I think he's up to speed more than a lot of people realize. He had 3 terms in Congress. He's been keeping track of what's been going on. I heard him at a conference last summer. He seemed to me at that time to be well read in on the condition of the world, and he shares a lot of the president's views about Iran, for example. He's very, very tough on that. He's very tough on terrorism as well. But I think most of all, we just have to wait and see how this is going to play out. It could not be more chaotic, I don't think, than it has been. Rex Tillerson was, to many of his friends and admirers, a disappointment because he did not really go in and organize the White House and take full advantage of it. He was going off in one direction, the president in another.
Well, Tom, you raised such an important point about this role. The Secretary of State and the White House spokesperson are 2 jobs that have a lot more to do with your ongoing relationship with the president than with anything that you may know or be good at, because either you credibly speak for the president or you don't. And so, does this, in your view, give a chance for at least a fresh start or a type of synergy around America's message in the world, even if it's one that remains controversial?
Well, you better remember, he is the president of the United States. He is the vicar of our foreign policy, and he wants somebody at his side who shares his view. Mike Pompeo does have a pretty strong record, not just that he was #1 in his class at West Point, but he had 3 terms in the Congress of the United States. He was a member of the Tea Party. He's a gregarious figure who can go to the Hill and have a lot of friends there, especially on the conservative side. And he's obviously ambitious. So we may have a little more coherence, whether you like the coherence or not, as a result of this appointment. I think we just all have to wait and see. There was a much higher expectation for, as you remember, for the Secretary of State, who is now on his way back to Texas, no question about that, than what he was able to deliver, because he didn't seem to have much high regard for what's next, what happens with the National Security Advisor, for example. What kind of system do we have in place for making these big decisions?
Tom Brokaw, urging a little patience and a little context. Thank you, as always, sir. Panel, my thanks to you as well. Adam Schiff speaking live right now about the conclusion of the House Russia probe. Let's listen in.
To continue our work. There are individuals who want to cooperate with our committee and share information, and will continue to do so. We will be putting together a report that will set out for the country what evidence we have seen to date, what evidence we have seen in terms of the Russian hacking and dumping operation, what evidence we have seen in terms of the Russian social media campaign, their paid media campaign, and yes, the issue of collusion with the Trump campaign. There is significant evidence, much of it in the public domain, on the issue of collusion. The secret meetings with George Papadopoulos, the secret meeting at Trump Tower with the president's son and son-in-law and campaign chairman, the lies and dissembling about that meeting, the promises by Russia that were communicated to the highest levels of the campaign in the preview, in the run-up to that meeting, that this was part of the Russian government's effort to help Donald Trump by providing derogatory information on Hillary Clinton. And, of course, the secret conversations that then acting National Security Advisor or incoming National Security Advisor Mike Flynn had with the Russian ambassador to undermine the bipartisan policy of the United States. Conversations that he lied about, that other transition officials were evidently aware of, that the vice president misrepresented unknowingly to the country. All of that bears on the issue of collusion. There are other facts outside of the public domain. And, of course, one of the most important parts of an investigation is putting the pieces together. But still, there is work to be done on that issue and on others, work we have not been allowed to do. Our committee, for example, has not even interviewed George Papadopoulos. But there are witnesses that were involved or knowledgeable about the Trump Tower meeting who have not been brought before our committee. There are text messages we have not sought to subpoena. We are releasing this evening a 22-page status report on the investigation that sets out some of the key witnesses that the majority has been unwilling to bring in, the key documents they have been unwilling to ask for, the witnesses who have come before our committee and stonewalled on key questions. so that the public can see just how incomplete this effort was. Sadly, from a very early point in the investigation, the chairman made the decision that his mission was not to find out what Russia did, not to determine the role of U.S. persons, but rather to endeavor to distract the public, to put the government on trial. That problem persisted throughout our investigation and has led to its premature conclusion last night. But the work is too important to leave undone. In particular, the American people need to know whether the Russians still have something they can hold over the president's head, the President of the United States. So our work is far from done, and we will be submitting to the public a detailed account of what we have learned to date and the work that has to be done, if not by us, then by others, so that the country can be sure that its administration is acting in the best interest of the country and not because of leverage the Russians may have over the President of the United States. And I would invite my colleagues to share their thoughts as well.
We have been listening to Congressman Adam Schiff. That's Congressman Adam Schiff, who just made news, making it official, criticizing his Republican colleagues, but going further to say that the House Democrats will put out their own House intelligence report on the Russia probe. Some have expected that, given all of the partisan rancor on the committee, but this is the first time, and it comes directly after House Republicans announced formally yesterday they're done interviewing witnesses, and they have their own findings of no collusion. I want to bring back Ambassador Michael McFaul, who's a close student of all of these issues. Your view of the news that Congressman Schiff just made.
Well, I applaud that they're going to do that so that the rest of us, including academics like myself, can use the material to write our own reports. But this is a tragedy. This is a real tragedy that we did not have a bipartisan independent commission to explore everything that happened in 2016, not just collusion of what the Russians did, of what the internet companies did in relation to the Russians, what the Russian media companies did, and then provide policy prescriptions. That's what we needed. That's what we didn't get from this committee. And I want to remind your listeners and your viewers, Ari, that's not Bob Mueller's assignment either. So we're not going to have the policy response to how do we defend our elections. And that, to me, is a real tragedy.
Well, you make such an important point because Mueller has a much narrower scope of the crimes committed. You're putting your finger on the work you used to do, which is where is the Congress on a nonpartisan or bipartisan basis figuring out where we go ahead. And the Democrat on the committee there telling us, breaking news moments ago, they're going ahead separately, two different reports. Thank you, as always, Ambassador, for being on the beat.
Thanks for having me.
We have a lot more coming up, including a big question today. Does Donald Trump have Twitter fingers? Why does he seem unable to fire people in person? Also, new reporting tonight on Roger Stone and new claims about his contact with WikiLeaks, including a filmmaker who joins me, who made a documentary about his whole life. And tonight, my legal breakdown on the case against Donald Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen. Plus, new reaction to Donald Trump looking at prototypes for the wall. California Attorney General Javier Becerra also on the show. I'm Ari Melbourne. You're watching The Beat on MSNBC.
We keep putting up this list, and it's getting longer and longer and longer and more ridiculous. I mean, literally at this point, we have to like do fancy camera work where I turn so you can have the bigger wall behind me so that we can make the list this big. This is nuts.
Rachel will need that extra real estate tonight. Rex Tillerson out, and this is a big one. Tillerson, essentially the most senior cabinet member that Trump has ousted. He got his pink slip on Twitter this morning. Tillerson's fourth in the line of succession for the presidency, and yet he still was fired by tweet, similar to the passive-aggressive firing of James Comey. So we are back to a point that, honestly, yes, has been made many times, but sometimes the truth is worth repeating. The man famous for pretending to fire people in dramatic boardroom meetings appears incapable of actually doing it in person while serving as the most powerful leader in the world.
Latoya, you're fired. You're fired. Cindy, you're fired. Anand, you're fired. Go.
Let's bring in two friends of the Beat, New York Daily News columnist Mike Lupica and founder and editor-at-large of the Weekly Standard, Bill Kristol. Mike Lupica, does it matter that this president can't have a face-to-face with these people that he praised, recruited, used, and is now removing.
It's odd what a tough, confrontational guy he is on social media and not in person. You know, Ari, I've been thinking all day that we're talking about Tillerson, who probably never should have been Secretary of State in the first place. Only Trump saw future John Foster Dulles there. But we're talking about this, and we're not talking about porn stars today. We're not talking about the way he got rolled by the NRA after all the big talk about what he was going to do about guns. But this, you're right, this absolutely runs to form. And the only thing missing with this, it was kind of like a teenager breaking up with his girlfriend in a text message. The only thing missing was that scene of Tillerson getting into the elevator and going down to the street and getting into the limo and riding away from The Apprentice.
And Bill, you know, there's a saying online about Twitter fingers. It refers to being tougher on Twitter than you are in real life. Does that, in your view, matter here? Does it give us an insight into, as Tom Brokaw was reminding everyone earlier in the show, into what is a very personal relationship and whether you click and have the trust of your diplomat?
Yeah, well, Trump is a bully, and bullies, I think, are notoriously also cowards, and I think that's true of President Trump, honestly. I mean, Comey he had inherited, so you could say he was, it's a little different relationship, perhaps, though, of course, he'd had him over to dinner one week into his presidency, Trump's presidency, to try to get him to be loyal. Rex Tillerson is in that job because Donald Trump asked him to take it. It is a little bit unbelievable, just from a human point of view, think about it, that a year later you decide to fire him. And here's what I gather happened. I guess there are slightly conflicting reports on the TikTok of the last few days, but that Trump wanted to fire Tillerson at the end of the week. Kelly said, well, you got to hold off. He's in the middle of a foreign trip. Let him get back here. I gather that, and someone should check on this, I gather Tillerson accelerated his return by about a day. He canceled a couple of little things at the end of his Africa trip. He got back. I think the Secretary of State's plane landed at 4 a.m. today, and Trump fired him, tweeted that he had fired him early in the morning. Tillerson was in town, you understand. He could have asked Tillerson to come to the White House at 8 a.m.
No, I do understand.
You know? So it's really, I mean, never think about that, just as a kind, again, just as a kind of human thing. We've all worked in organizations. I've had to fire people. I've been told that my services are no longer needed once or twice. I mean, the idea that the guy is in town, you appointed him, he's one of the most senior members of your cabinet, and you fire him by Twitter. It is very revealing about Trump.
It's revealing, and again, it goes to when he's hands-on and not. You mentioned the Comey example, which is under investigative review. There's a candlelight dinner. There's a lot of charm offensive, or whatever you want to call what it is that he does when he needs something. And then when he's done, he cannot bear to talk to the person. It seems that the public pressure, again, the fact that he was effectively criticized on shows like this one today led to him making at least a personal phone call, which he had not made, reportedly, before the tweet. Let me also read to you, Bill Kristol, as someone who's served in Republican politics and in the White House. It's not that these are... we just lost Mike Lubick. I hope he's okay. We lost his camera. Bill Kristol, look at this turnover and the churn rate. It is high compared to normal jobs in both Bush and Obama White Houses in those first years. People leave. It's not that that never happens, but here we see at 43%, it's much higher, Bill, and that goes to the question that's not just Trump criticism, but my question to you, does this mean it's harder to get new people, including people outside of government?
Yeah, totally. It's hard to get them if you think they might be fired. It's hard to get them if they think they'll be fired in a sort of humiliating and embarrassing way. Again, just to finish the sort of TikTok, I mean, you realize there was no urgency in him being fired. That is to say, they could have. Trump went to California. He can come, I guess he's coming back tomorrow or something. They could have arranged a meeting like this week. They could have had the ceremonious, so to speak, resignation. That they'd come to a parting of the ways at the beginning of next week. They could have had a transition. They could have had everything lined up. Instead, Trump goes. One of the undersecretaries in the State Department gives a sort of truthful account, I think, of what had happened, that Tillerson did not realize he was being fired. I think he was asked to come back early to talk to Trump. He thought he would have a chance to make an appeal to Trump. Trump, I think, was scared, honestly, of Tillerson coming to the Oval and saying, Mr. President, don't do this. This is a bad time. Give me 3 months or 6 months. Trump doesn't like to look at someone in the eye and say, no, I'm sorry, Rex, you've got to go. So he fires him before he can see Tillerson, and now we have this appearance of chaos, which again, it's not the end of the world, but it's not very helpful if you've got complicated diplomacy going on with respect to North Korea, Iran, and other places.
Yeah, and you speak to, again, how these things actually work and what it reveals. I got to fit in a break. Mike Lupica, don't count you out, even with satellite problems. We lost you for a second, but I see you pop back in. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
So I'm out of time. One or two final sentences in your view.
No, I just worried that the bar got lowered a little more, and this cabinet, Ari, has become a cabinet of sycophancy and bobblehead dolls and flattery, and I don't think that's good for the country.
Yeah, and the idea that it's only people who are coming from inside government, because this bill was explaining the pipeline from outside is narrowing. That has national security implications, apart from what one thinks of the president either way. Mike Lupica, Bill Kristol, thank you both. Up ahead, Donald Trump's pick for Secretary of State, once attacking WikiLeaks as hostile and doing the bidding of Russia. With a new report revealing tonight, Roger Stone told people that he was in contact with Julian Assange during the campaign. I have a special interview with the filmmaker who spent 5 years with Roger.
One man's dirty trick is another man's political civic action. Everything I do, everything I've ever done has been legal. But politics ain't beanbag, and losers don't legislate.
And Stormy Daniels' attorney told The Beat they're not going home. What happens next? I have for you tonight my special legal breakdown on the case against Donald Trump's longtime lawyer, Michael Cohen. That's ahead. Breaking news this hour on the Russia probe. Congressman Adam Schiff saying the Dems will write their own report after what he called the GOP's decision to conclude the investigation in a way that did a disservice to the nation. Meanwhile, incoming Secretary of State holding this position on an organization at the center of the Russia probe.
It's time to call out WikiLeaks for what it really is: a non-state hostile intelligence service often abetted by state actors like Russia.
That's a different tone from what we've heard from Trump's longtime advisor, Roger Stone. He's been championing Julian Assange.
He's a courageous journalist who has an incredible track record for accuracy and authenticity.
What's new is we know Bob Mueller's looking for answers about Stone and his relationship with Assange because Sam Nunberg told us right here on The Beat. Did they ask you about his dealings with Julian Assange?
Yes, they did. They asked, what did Roger tell me about his dealings with Julian Assange or his communications with Julian Assange during the election?
And breaking today, Nunberg is one of two sources telling the Washington Post that Roger Stone was talking with Assange in the spring of 2016. That timing matters because that would mean Stone was telling people about those hacked emails 2 months before anyone would know about it from public accounts. Now, Stone has long delighted in baiting his critics.
Those who say I have no soul, those who say I have no principles, are losers. Those are bitter losers. I revel in your hatred, because if I weren't effective, you wouldn't hate me.
I'm joined by Nick Ackerman, a former Watergate special prosecutor who first interviewed Roger Stone when you were on the Watergate Special Prosecution Force, and Morgan Peckmay. He is the director of what I just showed, the Netflix documentary Get Me Roger Stone, which he spent more than 5 years working on. Morgan, the big question with Stone, if you want to be focused on the facts and not the spectacle, is does he brag about things he didn't do in order to get attention, or does he overshare about potential conspiracies that he may be involved in?
He does both. So in July and in June of 2016, he told us that he was trying to meet with Julian Assange. We spoke with him about the possibility of bringing our crew to London to film them meeting. As far as we know...
Hold on. When you were making this documentary, he was telling you, as a documentary journalist, that he was trying to do contact with Assange?
Absolutely.
And that was successful contact?
We do not know if it was successful.
And I don't generally ask people if they're sources. You have the right to say no, but this Washington Post report has one named source, Nunberg, and one anonymous source. Are you the anonymous source in the Post article?
I am not the anonymous source.
So you tonight on The Beat are the third source confirming that Roger Stone, during the campaign, was talking about this contact with Assange.
Well, the Washington Post story says that he did meet with Assange. I am telling you that he was seeking to meet with Assange. We've discussed it many times.
He told you that.
Absolutely.
And do you have extra footage of that?
We have a lot of footage of him talking about Julian Assange, talking about all these subjects. In fact, one of his tweets was, "Wednesday, Hillary is done." That was in October of 2016. That day, our film crew went and we spent the day with Roger trying to see how he would react once Hillary was allegedly done. That day, nothing did come to pass. So we have seen...
I don't mean to, I didn't know that your interview tonight was going to be this newsworthy. Is your view then that your understanding is that Roger Stone, when you were spending that time shadowing him, had advanced knowledge the email hack was coming?
I do not know if he had advanced knowledge. He has said consistently that he could have extracted this idea that John Podesta could be in trouble from published news reports. That's what he contends. He certainly was extremely close with Paul Manafort. We know that Paul Manafort was working with the Podesta group. He may have had some sort of foreknowledge through that relationship. I do not know for certain if he met with WikiLeaks in advance of the election, but he was certainly attempting to do so.
Nick, is Morgan saying something that's legally important?
Extremely important. I mean, if you put this in the context of what we know and what Mueller knows, we know that on April 29th, Papadopoulos was told about the dirt, the emails, the thousands of emails that the Russians had. We know that on June 3rd, that the Trump campaign was notified, Don Jr. was notified about the dirt that was coming to Trump Tower. We know on June 9th that they met there. And then within a week, 2 days before the meeting on June 7th, Donald Trump is saying that the next week, next Monday, he's going to explain to people all the dirt on the Clintons.
Does this mean that Roger Stone has potential exposure as an accessory?
As a conspirator, in a conspiracy to steal the DNC emails and to use them to help Donald Trump get elected. That was the object of the conspiracy, and Roger Stone appears to be right in the middle of this.
Morgan, would you be willing to come back on the beat tomorrow to discuss this a little more?
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here. And Nick Ackerman, thank you for the legal vantage point. And that's fascinating. Up ahead, I have, as promised, my legal breakdown on the case against Donald Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen. New developments in the Stormy Daniels story putting more heat on Trump lawyer Michael Cohen. Daniels about to speak on 60 Minutes, which has Trump advisors so nervous they might try to block it from airing. Cohen now in a behind-the-scenes battle with Daniels, obtaining a new arbitration order against her, and a public battle with her lawyer, Michael Avenatti, who's dialing up the pressure, and Cohen facing legal filings arguing he violated election law by facilitating that $130,000 payment. He's also one of the names on Mueller's grand jury subpoena. And to top it all off, news broke on the beat just last night that Mueller's investigators now asking witnesses about Trump lawyers paying women. Did Mueller's folks ask anything that related to these issues around payments to people or women?
Well, look, they asked if I had ever heard anything about that, and my answer is I never have.
I've never heard you say that publicly before. In your FBI interview with Mueller's team, they were asking about payments to women?
They were asking if I knew anything about it.
So that's a lot. And there's plenty that people can criticize Cohen for. Commentators have called him everything from mysterious and brash to a shady liar. Now, people can make up their own minds about Cohen's actions, but as this story escalates, there is a focus on the law, and it's important to be accurate about the law in question. Cohen may have done a shady thing, even a dumb thing, but based on the legal history, this $130,000 payment itself was probably not a crime. And there are two reasons why. The first reason is something called the irrespective test, and the second reason is John Edwards. So let's start with a legal rule that goes by this ungainly name, irrespective test. Here's how the Federal Election Commission decides if a candidate's paying for a personal or campaign item. Under the law, you cannot use campaign funds for personal costs like vacation or student loans. Using campaign funds for personal use is prohibited. If the expense would exist even in the absence of the candidacy, then the personal use ban applies. So the law says that if this is an expense candidates pay irrespective of them running for office, then look, it's a personal expense and the campaign can't pay for it. So even though Cohen arranged this payment during the campaign, this rule gives him a legal defense that Trump was making hush payments irrespective of being a candidate. And of course, the New Yorker's Ronan Farrow and the author Michael Wolff have reported on many other Trump hush payments throughout his life. So the good news here for Trump and Cohen is they can prevail by publicizing how Trump pays hush money to women all the time. The bad news is they'd have to publicize how Trump pays hush money to women all the time. But if the payment was personal, then think about it. This entire complaint against Cohen does fall apart legally. The group Common Cause have been arguing that the payment was a campaign donation, and then the Trump campaign broke the law by not reporting it And they say if it was Cohen's money, he broke the law by giving more than the $2,700 limit. Or if he just facilitated money from the Trump organization, then that broke the law because such corporate donations are themselves illegal. You can see how that would be a big deal. But if the original payment was personal, not a donation, every one of those claims comes crashing down. Now, even if people don't like that outcome, it has logic, because if the FEC can just decide after an election personal spending should be recategorized as a campaign donation, then think about it, it can turn basically any candidate into a lawbreaker. And since the FEC bans campaigns from using their funds for these personal expenses, that would become a kind of a, well, like a catch-22. And that brings us to John Edwards. In 2011, prosecutors charged him on a similar theory. They argued the payments he made to a mistress should have been campaign donations. The trial showed Edwards was not a sympathetic defendant. Evidence about him cheating on his wife while she had terminal cancer emerged, but Edwards insisted he was a sinner, not a criminal.
While I do not believe I did anything illegal or ever thought I was doing anything illegal, I did an awful, awful lot that was wrong. And there is no one else responsible for my sins.
The jury agreed. They acquitted him on the charge for a $200,000 payment from a donor for his mistress. Sound familiar? They did not convict him on any other charges. Conservative and legal experts agreed.
A lot of conservatives who don't even like John Edwards thought this case was, to use their words, appalling. They just thought it was without merit and that it was the government trying to regulate personal conduct.
We looked this up. At the time, leading legal groups like Crew, an ethics organization started by some Democrats, also opposed the Edwards prosecution, saying the entire case rests on finding that the payments to Edwards' mistress were in fact campaign contributions, but no court has ever interpreted the definition of campaign contribution this broad. That was true then about Edwards, regardless of what you think of him, and it looks to be the case for Michael Cohen today. The law doesn't change based on who's sitting at the defendant's table. The payment to Stormy Daniels doesn't look like an illegal campaign donation, and that's based here on this FEC rule and the history. Now, let's be clear. Many questionable things have emerged about Michael Cohen during this whole story. And now, as I just explained, his legal defense may require him to prove these hush payments were common for Trump and thus something they were doing irrespective of being a candidate. So Cohen's legal defense is not about denying material that seems incriminating. It's actually about publicizing that material himself. So legally, he may have to take a page from the playbook of another strategist skilled in battle, Eminem, who famously won a rap battle by listing off all the negative information about himself, saying it proudly, and handing the mic to an opponent and saying, "Here, tell these people something they don't know about me." And that can make for an embarrassing mic drop, but it is still a mic drop. Donald Trump's visiting what might be his most politically hostile state in the whole nation, California. There are protests breaking out as well as counter-protests. Trump is touring prototypes of the proposed border wall. Now, California is sued to stop construction of the wall. A judge sided on that one with Trump. His administration, though, is also suing California back over its immigration laws, and the DOJ naming Governor Brown and Attorney General Javier Becerra in the suit. The lawsuit says California's sanctuary city laws violate federal power and the Constitution.
I think Governor Brown's done a very poor job running California. They have the highest taxes in the United States. The place is totally out of control. You have sanctuary cities where you have criminals living in the sanctuary cities. The drugs are pouring through in California. When we put up the real wall, we're going to stop 99%, maybe more than that.
Joining me now is California Attorney General Becerra. Thank you for being on the program. Why is California fighting with Donald Trump so much?
Ari, thanks for having me. And we're only fighting Donald Trump because Donald Trump is trying to stop us from doing everything that's made us the #1 economy for the country. In fact, the 6th largest economy in the world.
His ideas on the wall, though, your view is they are illegal or just bad ideas?
It's ancient. It's a medieval wall. Even 1,000 years ago, they stopped relying solely on walls to defend themselves, and why should we do that in the 21st century? We're beyond that. Plus, he's trying to do it in a way that's unlawful. He didn't obey federal law. He's disrespecting state law, and we have a right to make sure that the law is enforced. He's not above the law.
Let me tick off some of what we have here on these fights. Immigration, you have the sanctuary cities, as mentioned, the border wall, of course, the travel ban. But California also suing this administration over transgender issues, birth control, Obamacare, natural gas rules, Clean Air Act, water protection, fracking rules. There are some people who welcome that. They see you and Governor Brown as a bulwark. There are others who say, are you picking your battles? Or does it seem at a certain point like that virtually anything he does, you guys go to court?
Ari, name one of those that you would want to see anybody, a community, a city, a state go backwards on: fracking, clean energy, treating immigrants with less respect. We're interested in growing. We're interested in building. We're interested in showing people that California is a destination. That's why we're 40 million strong, and we become the bulwark of our national economy.
I also want to ask you before you go about this ICE official who said that his concern was bearing a burden knowing that some of the information they're putting out was false. Your response?
Are we surprised? We've known that from Washington, D.C. and the White House, we've not been receiving accurate information for quite some time. I think Robert Mueller, and now we see this ICE representative spokesperson giving us a clear signal that oftentimes what we hear from the Trump administration is not true. Surprise, surprise.
Attorney General Javier Becerra, thank you for coming on The Beat.
Thank you.
And that does it for our show tonight. I will be live in Washington tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern with a lot of guests. Hardball with Chris Matthews starts now.
Don't call me a moron. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington, where it's been a wild day with a tweet this morning at 8:44. President Trump fired his Secretary of State. Can you imagine George Washington doing that to Thomas Jefferson, even if he could tweet? Well, it came here a mere hours after Rex Tillerson touched down at Joint Base Andrews, back from a cut short 5-country tour of Africa. And after this morning's tweet, though still before reaching out to Tillerson himself, Trump spoke to reporters and made clear he wanted someone in the State Department who wouldn't disagree with him. He found his man in CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Let's watch.
Rex and I have been talking about this for a long time. We got along actually quite well, but we disagreed on things. When you look at the Iran deal, I think it's terrible. I guess he thought it was okay. I wanted to either break it or do something, and he felt a little bit differently. So we were not really thinking the same. With Mike Pompeo, we have a very similar thought process. I think it's going to go very well. I actually got along well with Rex, but really it was a different mindset. It was a different thinking. I wish Rex a lot of good things. I think he's going to do, I think he's going to be very happy. I think Rex will be much happier now, but I really appreciate his service. But with Mike, we've had a very good chemistry right from the beginning.
Well, actually, Rex is not the name of a dog. It's the name of the Secretary of State until a few hours ago. Rex Tillerson often seemed to be, however, out of the loop on foreign policy. He pushed talks with North Korea when Trump was arguing for fire and fury. Then last week, Tillerson told reporters America was a long way from negotiations, just hours before President Trump deputized the South Koreans to inform reporters. And by the way, Trump agreed to meet with Kim Jong-un by May. So he's always at cross swords with this guy. Tillerson never denied an NBC report in October last year that he had called the president a moron last summer. I think Trump remembered that. Today, NBC reported the president could never get past, in fact, that naming of him as a moron. He talked about comparing IQ scores. Anyway, the White House and State Department seemed to offer counter narratives as to when Tillerson actually found out he was finished. According to NBC, Chief of Staff John Kelly spoke with Tillerson by phone on Friday and told him that Trump intended to ask him to step aside. Kelly did not specify when that change might come. Kelly also called Tillerson again on Saturday, a senior White House official said, expressing once again the president's imminent intention to replace him as Secretary of State. Well, a senior State Department official told NBC that Tillerson officially learned of his firing when the president tweeted the news this morning. And Steve Goldstein, the Undersecretary of State for Public Affairs, said today the secretary had every intention of remaining. And the secretary didn't speak to the president this morning and is unaware of the reason. Well, hours later, Goldstein was fired. Josh Letterman, the AP reporter who was on the plane with Tillerson last night, described the secretary's demeanor. Well, let's listen to him.
I have to tell you, Hallie, there were really no indications from his behavior, from that of his aides or other people on the plane that this was imminent. If Tillerson knew at that point that this was his swan song and that he would not appear publicly much longer as Secretary of State, he sure didn't show it.
Well, Rex Tillerson delivered a statement of his own today, thanking diplomats, soldiers, and the American people, but leaving out the man he served for the past 14 months, Donald Trump. The only mention of the president was a pointed reference to the fact that he didn't hear from him until hours after the news had broken. Let's watch that.
I received a call today from the President of the United States at a little after noontime from Air Force One, and I've also spoken to White House Chief of Staff Kelly. I will be meeting members of my front office team and policy planning later today to thank them for their service. They have been extraordinarily dedicated to our mission, which includes promoting values that I view as being very important.
Andrew Mitchell's NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent. Jonathan Swan is national political reporter for Axios. And Michael Steele's the former chair of the Republican National Committee and an MSNBC political analyst. Andrew, I've been thinking about you all morning. This is amazing. You've studied this foreign policy sphere for so long. Has any president in history treated his or her Secretary of State like a dog like this?
Not that I can recall. I mean, Alexander Haig was fired, and arguably for cause. The chemistry was terrible between these two, so there's no question that Rex Tillerson was on the outs with the president. But he had an ally in Jim Mattis, the defense secretary, and many people in the government felt that he was at least restraining some of the president's worst impulses. He had always said that he would have to fire him to his face, that he was not going to quit. And in fact, what happened was he was fired on Twitter, and then that follow-up phone call, as you point out, from Air Force One. So there was no question that this was really a terrible way of executing the Secretary of State, and he was emotional in that appearance today. I've never seen him quite like that. Yeah. And in fact, Josh Letterman is absolutely correct. Our producer, Abigail Williams, was also on that trip and said that he was almost ebullient in his briefing, an unusual briefing to the State Department press corps overnight. And in that final night on the plane, he told them how much he was looking forward to being the point person for the talks with North Korea. He went through a lot of the policy issues, and then also went through a very tough criticism of Russia for its role, according to the UK, in the attempted assassination by nerve gas of a former Russian spy and his daughter in the UK. So he took a very hard line against Russia, which the White House deliberately did not do just hours earlier from the podium. There were so many disagreements, but I think Iran was the most profound one, plus the lack of chemistry between the two.
Well, what about this fact? I just want to get through this because it tells us more about the president than the now ex-secretary of State. Why do you think he told him on Friday? Is there any way to get through this, or did he never knew till he heard the tweet this morning? Which is the truth?
Well, John Kelly is telling White House officials that he certainly gave them the heads up. But this was only the last of so many times during the last 14 months when the president was threatening to fire Rex Tillerson. So Tillerson did not take that to heart, did not think that he was going to be fired. And Kelly, of course, we've known in the past, has not always been straightforward in describing conversations. So all we know is from White House officials and White House correspondents that Kelly says that he certainly gave him the heads up on Friday night and again at 2:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. Tillerson had been up for some 72 hours, and that was certainly a warning sign, but he thought he could repair it when he got back here.
Well, hold on there, Andrew. Let me go to Jonathan. It seems to me, you get to the question of the president's behavior here. and it's either personal, just vindictive, torture it. Is he cruel? Is he sadistic? Does he like to fire people at long distance, or is he afraid to do it face-to-face, man-to-man? Because he seems to have this habit now of firing Comey when he's on the West Coast 3,000 miles away, or Reince Priebus when he's somewhere else. And presidents, I think, well, I'll just say this. They owe the people they appoint and bring to Washington the courtesy of a man-to-man or face-to-face, offer a request to resign. Let the man resign with some class. What's the reason he has to humiliate them by remote control, I should say?
Right. Well, I can't psychoanalyze Trump, but what I can tell you is that the only context in which he's ever fired people is on television, directly. It is literally the only time he's actually directly, face-to-face, told people that they're fired.
You mean when he was on The Apprentice?
When he said on The Apprentice, you're fired. And this is the weirdness of working for Donald Trump. When you talk to people at the senior level of the White House, they will tell you in graphic detail about all the things Trump has said in the past 24 hours about John Kelly, for example, his chief of staff. He opens the kimono, tells them everything, but then they're saying, OK, well, he must be ready to fire him, and then he'll bounce names off. But it doesn't happen. And this is the same inertia.
Well, NBC reported that Tillerson called the president a moron after a meeting at the Pentagon where Trump proposed increasing the country's nuclear arsenal. The president told Forbes magazine, I think it's fake news, but if he did that, I guess we'll have to compare IQ tests, and I can tell you who is going to win. This is Trump talking last year. In an interview with CNN the following week, Tillerson repeatedly refused to deny using the word moron. Let's watch.
As I indicated earlier, when I was asked about that, I'm not going to deal with that kind of petty stuff. I mean, this is a town that seems to relish gossip, rumor, innuendo, and they feed on it. They feed on one another in a very destructive way. I don't work that way. I don't deal that way, and I'm just not going to dignify the question. I'm not playing. These are the games of Washington. I'm not dignifying the question with an answer.
Well, nice try, but the president heard him say that he was a moron.
Yeah.
Were his days numbered? Was he like Fredo, waiting for Michael to get him?
Yeah, from that moment on. I think there were problems with the relationship coming in the door. Tillerson was not necessarily Trump's guy, but it was, Reince and Jared and others who really liked the idea of bringing Tillerson in. And from that moment, that was it. I think the president was pretty much biding his time. And to your first point about a question about his ability to fire people, he's never had to do that because it's all been scripted before.
Yeah.
And now this is real life where, to your point, the dignity of the office requires you approach those individuals with a certain amount of dignity and give them that. He still doesn't see that. He sees this as the end game. This is how I win. Ultimately, I trump your cards with this approach.
Let me go back to Andrew. I want to get back to a couple of things about Trump. But Andrew, I want to get back to you because I'm worrying about foreign policy now. Donald Trump campaigned on a kind of a mishmash of policies, but one of them was, I'm going to rebuild America and do infrastructure, stuff that appealed to me, I must say, as a person, as a citizen. He also talked about stopping stupid wars, which clearly was running against W, and how he got involved with Iraq especially. That was very attractive to working people, who a lot of whose kids have to go fight these wars. Now he's into the hawkish mode again on Iran. If we don't have this treaty with Iran, if we don't have this deal to stop them from developing nuclear weapons, we got to have some other method of stopping them. And that means some sort of active war, it seems to me. So why are we going back? It seems to me Trump is getting dangerous again.
Well, Trump is very heavily he's very heavily influenced by Netanyahu and by all of those Trump supporters like Sheldon Adelson and other supporters who are really, really against Iran, and certainly by Saudi Arabia. Look, he went to Riyadh first. So this is the Sunni Arabs aligned against Iran, and that's the side he's taken. The argument, the counter-argument, which you make and with a lot of diplomats and others make, is that if you blow up the Iran deal, and there's another deadline approaching in May, what signal are you sending to Kim Jong-un and others with nuclear weapons, but most principally North Korea, that any deal negotiated with the U.S., with the Trump administration, will not be observed? So not only is it a real breach as far as all of our European allies, plus Russia and China, the other signatories to the Iran deal, it's not just a two-way deal. This was a six-party agreement blessed by the UN and the European Union. So you blow that up just before you sit down with Kim Jong-un, not smart, and in fact, very risky foreign policy. So that's one thing. The other little thing about dignity and the way what you were describing with Jonathan and with Michael is other things that really upset Tillerson, clearly upset him. Remember the Boy Scout Jamboree?
Sure.
Tillerson had only 2 or 3 days earlier been awarded a medal there at the Boy Scout Jamboree. He's a former Eagle Scout. He cares about the Boy Scouts. This is very important. He was on the Boy Scout board. And to watch the president then go and give a really flagrantly political speech to the Boy Scouts with lots of curse words and other suggestions was really deeply offensive, and he was upset by Charlottesville. So there's a side to Rex Tillerson, which is a dignified person. He didn't understand the State Department. He didn't understand the culture here. He fired people or forced them to resign in dismay. Two of the most prominent very recently in the last 10 days. There are vacancies. He's hollowed out this department. Young people are no longer taking the Foreign Service exam in large numbers. There's a real problem here, which might be generational. That said, this was a decent man, and he was treated shamefully.
Okay, thank you so much. You're the expert, Andrea Mitchell. It's great to hear your expertise on this topic, especially foreign affairs. You know it all, and you know every one of the people you're talking about. Thank you. Jonathan Swan, we get more. Now, I want to talk about the basic nuttiness of this behavior by the president next time, Ron, and Michael Steele, too. Coming up, the Russia investigation. Roger Stone, remember him, reportedly talked to the founder of WikiLeaks, and knew in advance about that hacked Democratic emails. It comes amid new reporting about a proposed meeting between candidate Trump and Vladimir Putin. It's more damning evidence just one day after Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee denied there was any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Nice try, GOPs. Plus, in less than an hour, polls close in the race for Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district. Democrats are hoping that a win in Trump country will lay the groundwork for a big blue wave come November. And Trump's clearinghouse and clearing his head, certainly clearing his head, with today's firing of Rex Tillerson, the president sent a message. If you're not on his side, be prepared to get out of the way. Imagine if Mitt Romney had taken the job of Secretary of State over frog legs. Remember that dinner? He would be humiliated today, just like Rex. Finally, let me finish tonight with Trump Watch. This is hardball, where the action is. Well, after setting off a political firestorm in Washington, D.C. early today, President Trump headed to California. The trip, which includes a Republican fundraiser later this evening, marks Trump's first visit to California since becoming president. First visit. Shortly after touching down, Trump headed to the California desert, where he inspected prototypes for his border wall. While reviewing the structures, there they are, Trump stressed the need for a wall that would prevent incredible climbers, real climbers, from getting into this country. Here he goes.
The round piece that you see up here, or you see more clearly back there, the larger it is, the better it is, because it's very hard to get over the top. It's really deterrent from getting over the top. Who would think? Who would think? But getting over the top is easy. These are like professional mountain climbers. They're incredible climbers. They can't climb some of these walls. Some of them they can. Those are the walls we're not using.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hardball. In a stunning display of partisanship, Republicans controlling the House Intelligence Committee have abruptly shut down their investigation of Russian interference, prematurely clearing President Trump and his campaign for what happened in 2016. Yet we're already seeing that at least one top Republican on that committee, Congressman Mike Conaway, is having a difficult time explaining the report's conclusions. Conaway said last night that the full Republican report would, quote, suggest that the extent that any Russians acted on behalf of either candidate, it was for Hillary Clinton. Today, however, Conway is taking that back, saying he misspoke. Let's watch.
Mr. Conway, you said twice yesterday that you actually believe that the Russians wanted to help Hillary Clinton. Can you be clear about what's actually in the report or in the secondary report? Twice yesterday yesterday when we asked you twice, you said that you believe that Russians wanted to help.
He was not. I mean, nothing that they did remotely helped Hillary Clinton. No, there was no evidence, to my view, that he was trying to help her. I'm sorry if I misspoke.
Sorry if I misspoke. Well, meanwhile, after being left in the dark by their Republican colleagues, Democrats on that committee, the Intel Committee, have described the Republican report as a sham and a capitulation to the White House. Tonight, they have released a report of their own summarizing their findings in the investigation to date. And joining me right now is the ranking Democrat of the House Intelligence Committee, U.S. Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman Schiff, thank you for joining us. What is the burning problem with the Republican report as you read it?
Well, it reads like a elongated version of the Nunes memo. It cherry picks information, it omits key facts, and it's designed to convey a political narrative rather than a fact-finding mission. And of course, it's dramatically incomplete because they curtailed the investigation when we still had dozens of key witnesses to interview and lots of documents that we didn't even request. There are issues, for example, involving Trump campaign personnel reaching out to WikiLeaks and being in direct communication with Guccifer too. And we asked to subpoena Twitter and get those messages. They were unwilling to do it. We had allegations just within the last 2 weeks that people who testified under oath in our committee may have testified falsely, but they're unwilling to pursue it. Even Steve Bannon, who they, with great ceremony, beat their chest and say, we cannot allow him to simply stonewall and refuse to answer questions, and he needs to be hauled before the court to answer if necessary. They've decided, well, never mind. We'd rather not know. And that's the fundamental problem here. It's been a unserious effort, really an effort to give the appearance of an investigation without doing a credible and thorough investigation.
Well, in the report you released tonight, you suggested there might be more documentation of the president's interactions with former FBI Director James Comey, interactions that could represent obstruction of justice. Quote, the minority has a good faith reason to believe that the White House does in fact possess such documentation memorializing President Trump's conversations with Director Comey. So tell us where that goes. Do you think you've got strong evidence now or good evidence that suggests obstruction of justice by the president?
Well, it's really hard to say because these documents that we've requested, they haven't been willing to insist upon. Mr. Conaway and I wrote to the White House on a bipartisan basis when the president suggested that he might have tapes of conversations with James Comey, asking for any recordings, but not just recordings, any memoranda or other documents that reflect his conversations with Comey that would shed light on the issue of obstruction of justice. The White House basically told us that they answered our letter by tweet. And when we took issue and wrote them a second bipartisan letter suggesting that if they didn't comply, we would subpoena them, they told us to pound sand. From that point until today, we haven't been able to get the majority to follow up with a subpoena. And that would be a pattern that would be replicated time and time again over the last year. When we got no for an answer, the Republicans said, we're perfectly fine with that.
Well, the Washington Post is reporting, Congressman, that Trump's former campaign advisor, Roger Stone, told an associate in the spring of 2016 that he had advanced knowledge of the Russian-hacked emails that would upend the 2016 election. In a phone conversation, quote, Stone said he had learned from WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange that his organization had obtained emails that would torment senior Democrats such as John Podesta, then campaign chairman of Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. The reported conversation occurred before it was publicly known that hackers had obtained the emails of Podesta and of the Democratic National Committee. The reporting appears to contradict what Stone said last week on MSNBC. Let's watch that.
I never had any advanced knowledge of the content, the source, or the exact timing of the WikiLeaks disclosures. I never predicted that John Podesta's emails would be hacked. I predicted that his business activities would come under scrutiny.
Congressman, what do you make of that defense by Roger Stone? We've heard about the time in the barrel and all that stuff, how Podesta's getting his turn. It's coming based upon what looked to be earlier knowledge by Roger Stone of what the Russians had hacked and who they're going to hurt with it. And now he's coming back and saying, well, I was talking about something else, but now we're getting reporting that he did, in fact, get advance word about WikiLeaks and what they're getting from the Russians. What do you make of all this in terms of collusion?
Well, what Roger Stone has said before is that his whole strategy is deny, deny, deny. And indeed, that's a strategy that President Trump also adopts. He repeats no collusion, no collusion, no collusion as a mantra. He credits Roy Moore when Roy Moore says, I didn't do it. He credits Rob Porter when Rob Porter says, I didn't do it. If you deny, you'll be fine in the president's world and in Roger Stone's. You're a loser if you admit to anything. We as a committee can't simply take Roger Stone's word for things. We need to get from Twitter, because we can't be confident we'll get them from Roger Stone, any private communications that he had, direct messages that he had with Guccifer 2 or WikiLeaks. And other witnesses that contradict Roger Stone should be brought before our committee. We should find out who's telling the truth. What the Republicans would like to do instead is put out a report that essentially says We asked Roger Stone, and he denied it, and therefore there's no evidence to the contrary. That's not an investigation. That's just the facade of an investigation.
Okay. They don't look good. By the way, why does the Senate committee work in such a bipartisan way? And Richard Burr works so well with Mark Warner. They actually seem like they're on the level, whereas the Republicans on your committee don't look like they're on the level. They look like, to use an old political term, toadies for Trump. That's what they look and sound like.
The leadership comes from the top, and the leadership on our committee, even during periods when he said he was recused, comes from Chairman Nunes. And I think he has seen his mission as carrying the water for the White House rather than doing a credible investigation. That, of course, put us in the position of either going along with that charade or speaking out, and that really was no choice at all.
Thank you very much, Congressman. U.S. Congressman Adam Schiff of California. A new book, by the way, out today, provides a captivating new account of Russia's unprecedented influence campaign as it played out during the 2016 presidential campaign. Russian Roulette by authors David Corn and Michael Isikoff puts together many of the pieces that are undoubtedly central to the special counsel's ongoing investigation. And one of the new details in the book, they report, focuses on a meeting in March of 2016 between Trump, Jeff Sessions, and the campaign's foreign policy team. They reveal that when foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos said he had foreign contacts who could arrange a meeting with Putin, he received at least tacit approval to proceed. Quote, Papadopoulos later told investigators he believed Trump gave him encouragement, according to sources familiar with Papadopoulos' account. Trump said the idea was interesting and looked at Sessions as if he expected him to follow up, and Sessions nodded in response. I'm joined right now by the book's authors, David Corn, his Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones, and Michael Isikoff, his chief investigative correspondent for Yahoo News. Gentlemen, thank you. You are great investigative reporters, so let me start with David and then you go to Michael. What was the juiciest stuff in your book? What is it that people should read, to dig for, and enjoy because it makes a point historically? What is that to look for?
Well, how much time do you have, Chris?
Just start with the biggies.
Well, you just mentioned one of the biggies. That was an indication from an eyewitness, from a person who was in contact with the Russians for 5 months, first trying to set up a meeting between Trump and Putin, and then when that didn't seem possible, setting up a back channel off-the-record connection with Putin's own office. And he was doing this throughout the summer after it was publicly reported that Russia had hacked the Democratic emails and had dumped them. So we knew there was an information warfare campaign against the United States from Moscow. So I think that's pretty significant. We also talk about a secret source in the Kremlin in 2014 giving a U.S. official sort of heads up that Putin was planning a massive information campaign. And there's a great opening scene in the book, of course, in the opening chapter, in which Donald Trump is briefed by Jim Comey on the Steele dossier, which hasn't become public yet. He's given a 2-page summary of that. And Trump looks at Comey and says, actually after he gets the memo, walks out and tells his aides, Comey is trying to set me up. This is a shakedown. Trump thought the whole intelligence community was trying to tell Trump, we have something on you, you better do what we want. So the whole paranoia that prevents Trump from dealing with the pressing issue of Russian meddling in the election and maybe in the future elections sort of came from that very dramatic moment. Those are just a few. Mike probably has his own.
Yeah, Michael, sure. let me ask you, Mike, about another career I have. You know, I've watched politics since I was a kid, 5 years old, and I've never heard a presidential campaign so tied him up with Russians. Russians here, Russians there, everything. All these weird characters from Carter Page to Roger Stone, all Russian connected. All these Russian names you can't pronounce, all around them. All these meetings. Why? Did you ever? And you're writing up. What is this weird Russophile loved by the Trump people? Why are they involved with Russians so much?
Look,
your thoughts?
It goes back to where we start the book, actually, the opening chapter, which is the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow, where Trump's primary goal was a business deal with a oligarch close to Putin, Aras Agalarov, to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. Trump is obsessed with during that trip. Why? Because
who wants to go to Russia? It's like last on the list of any places anybody wants to visit. Why do you want to go there?
To solidify himself as a global oligarch. This was something he had thought about, talked about for years, made numerous efforts. Here he was coming close. But in order to get close, in order for that deal to go through, he needed Putin's approval. approval. So that's where you see the birth of the bromance between Trump and Putin. Trump, during that time, and we have some fresh reporting on this, is obsessed with the idea of meeting Putin during that trip. He keeps asking everybody around him, is Putin coming? Have we heard from Putin yet? He's expecting a phone call. Has Putin called? Ultimately, he does get a phone call, but it's not from Putin. It's from Peskov, the press spokesman, who tells him he's sorry, the Russian president is tied up, isn't going to be able to make it. But Putin follows up, sends Trump, after that trip, this gift in a black lacquered box, including and a personal note. Talk about the things that the House Intelligence Committee didn't get in its investigation.
Right
what was in that? What was the gift?
So what's going on here? We'll be right back. Let's take a break. We'll be right back with David Corn and Michael Isikoff. Right back. We had a technical difficulty, as you know, at the end of that block. Would like to thank David Corn and Michael Isikoff. Great investigative reporting for coming on the show. We'll be back to you guys in a few days to get over it again. That's a hell of a book. We want to know more about it. Russian Roulette. Meanwhile, it's election night in southwestern Pennsylvania. We're only about 30 minutes away from the polls closing in Pennsylvania. Republican Rick Saccone faces off against moderate Democrat Connor Lamb in a special election to fill the vacated House seat in Pennsylvania's, there it is, 18th district. It's down there in the southwest. Republicans are desperate for a win, hoping to avoid an embarrassing loss in what some see as a key litmus test of President Trump's popularity ahead of the 2018 midterms. That said, a Republican with knowledge of the race tells NBC News tonight, we're not feeling good. According to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, voter turnout was high this morning. That's good for the Democrat. From where I'm joined by Charlie Dent, outgoing Republican congressman from Pennsylvania's 15th district. Congressman, that's Jack Murtha country, very conservative Democrat country or Republican country. It's Appalachian. It's poor white in many ways. It's a little bit sophisticated, you might say, suburban, but generally rural, and it's seen as very much Trump country.
Well, correct. The South
20
Hills
points he won by.
Yeah, the South Hills of Pittsburgh are a little bit more suburban and a little more moderate, but the rest of the district is pretty much deer hunter country, coal, fracking, all that. Look, Trump won this district by 20 points, but I don't believe it's a 20-point Trump district. A lot of people who were supporting President Trump were anti-Hillary, so I think it's actually tighter. Clearly, recent polls showed a tight race. One today, Monmouth had Lamb up by 6.
Yeah, in a surge model, if it really is a big turnout.
And intensity and energy seems to be on the Democratic side at the moment.
If it's up around 6, if we're all predicting here now, we all know in a couple hours, polls close at 8 Eastern. What happens if Lamb wins big? Does that tell you that the delegation in Pennsylvania could end up being about 9-9 instead of what it is now 13-5 in terms of the proportion of Democrat and Republican members of Congress?
Under the new map, it could conceivably go on a great night for Democrats. It could go 10-8 Democrat, 9-9. That is true. But what's interesting about
they could pick up 5 seats just in Pennsylvania.
Well, in the Southeast, look, under the new map, there are 7 guaranteed Republican seats, 5 guaranteed Democrat seats, and 6 competitive seats. The Democrats, if they run the tables in eastern Pennsylvania, and they could do that, that could take this.
Do you think your district's going for the Dems?
Well, right now it's been redistricted. It's a slight lean Democratic seat on the PVI presidential index, +1 Democrat. It could. It's the same district that I won 4 times.
I can see 4 in the East going Democrat that haven't been before.
Yeah, no, that's entirely possible.
Let me ask you about Trump. Is he going to carry Pennsylvania next time? Or is that resentment he ran on the first time worn out already?
Well, it depends who the Democratic candidate is. I mean, my feeling was...
Well, they're not going to run Pelosi.
That's right.
They're not going to run somebody that this guy, Saccone, just loves running against.
I just remember a lot of people who supported Donald Trump were anti-Hillary, and I thought that was a big part of it.
Who wins, Trump or Elizabeth Warren in Pennsylvania next time?
I believe Trump would win that because she's just too far.
How about him against Bernie?
I still... Well...
How about him against Biden?
I think it'd be really tough to beat Biden because I think he can appeal to a lot of folks that maybe Bernie or...
Who would you vote for?
That's a tough one.
No, who would you vote for, Trump or Biden? Come on, make news. You vote for Biden. Come on.
Well, I don't know yet. We'll see. We'll see. That's a long way off. By the way, these 2 guys are running in Pittsburgh. Both of them could be congressmen in November. Because if
I know.
That's what's going to happen.
Anybody? I'm predicting. You're predicting Lamb tonight.
I think right now, slight edge Democrat.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we're at 4. We'll see. Anyway, Congressman Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania, now a track tout. Up next, today's firing of Rex Tillerson shows the president is looking to get rid of anyone who doesn't agree with him 100 times. 100% of the time, he's the boss. And he's not looking to build a team of rivals. He ain't no Lincoln. Trump is no Lincoln. Big surprise. You're watching the Hardball. Welcome back to Hardball. President Trump today told reporters that Rex Tillerson will be much happier now that he's out as Secretary of State, but might also improve the president's spirits now that he's showing who's boss. According to Reuters, today's announcement shows the president's, quote, growing impatience with his initial set of hand-picked advisors who he viewed as slow-walking his favored policies. Meanwhile, the Washington Post's David Ignatius writes, Tillerson was ousted in a way that reinforced the humiliating treatment he received from Trump since the beginning, fired by tweet, given only an elliptical warning by White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. In fact, Trump's sacking of Tillerson is just the latest in a series of indirect dismissals, all from a man famous for firing people face-to-face on television. Trump fired former FBI Director James Comey while he was traveling in California, 3,000 miles away, and he announced the departure of Chief of Staff Reince Priebus from Air Force One while Priebus sat on the tarmac outside the plane. Cute. So who's the next high-profile departure from the Trump White House? We'll get to that and some other staff shakeups that are raising eyebrows today. That's next with the Hardball Roundtable. Welcome back to Hardball. Rex Tillerson was the biggest name to be ousted from the Trump administration this week, but he's not the only one. Tillerson's spokesman, Undersecretary of State Steve Goldstein, was let go after contradicting the White House account of Tillerson's firing. On Monday, Trump's personal assistant, John McEntee, was sacked and escorted from the White House premises. He wasn't allowed to go back and get his coat. NBC News reports that McEntee is under investigation by the Secret Service for serious financial crimes, and his security clearance had been revoked. How's that make him different? Anyway, he will join Trump's 2020 reelection campaign as a senior advisor, even though they walked him out of the room. Anyway, let's bring in the Hardball Roundtable. Adolfo Franco's a Republican strategist and RNC surrogate. Donna Edwards, the former Democratic Congresswoman from Maryland and senior fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice. And Ann Garrett is White House correspondent. She's also a candidate for county executive in Prince George's County, not to be called Peachy County, Prince George's County, nearby Washington. An executive position. Okay, anybody wants to start this. What does this say about Trump, the way he sacked his Secretary of State?
Go ahead. He has no class. You know, and you obviously you have to be either a sycophant or a son-in-law to keep your job in the White House, and you better look for your resume.
Oh, I think the president has used tweets before, and he's gotten used to tweeting. I don't think people are reading too much into this. They keep saying you're fired. There was a television program. At the end of the day, you know, all these individuals you've mentioned, with all due respect, including the Secretary of State, knew that the Chief of Staff has said of the White House to John Kelly, it's imminent. Wait till I get back. He waited until he returned.
Well, how come there were reports saying of him coming back on the plane last night, acting happy-go-lucky, had no idea it was coming?
Well,
he gave an interview. Yeah, I mean, he came back and talked to the reporters traveling with him on the plane, and not only did he give absolutely no sign that he was about to lose his job, but he talked about long-term plans. He was in a good mood. He kind of gave not only a retrospective of the trip, but he said, and here's what we're doing going forward. He said he was going to be part of the North Korea discussions. He either didn't know, which was the clear view of the reporters with him, or he was doing
We were just talking 4, 5, 6 months ago whether he would bring to the
What was the moron comment?
Oh, the moron comment was made months and months
ago. Do
ago.
You think the president should have forgiven the moron comment?
I think the president did forgive the moron comment. The moron comment was made 8 months ago. But there was really talk, Congresswoman, about his departure in December. What is the big story here?
There was all along.
The Secretary of State was sacked by tweet.
Right. And it's because of the way he did it. I mean, it's really shameful.
So our program here is about form over substance, just the way things are being communicated.
Is this the Planet of the Apes?
Well,
is this how we behave now?
No, but I think we're talking about rather than policy, how things are looking at Iran. Let's talk about Iran.
Look, it is the Secretary of State, and I mean, the president has a right to have the people around him that he wants. But the question is how you do some things. And the president actually has ended up creating a news story that he didn't need, but maybe it trumps the news story of Stormy Daniels, who he knocked off the front pages. I think the president does that too. But the fact is, I mean, the president, go ahead. I mean, the president has a right to have the people he wants.
We're kind of overthinking this, right?
Yes.
I mean, to a point, this has been inevitable. This was an anvil waiting to fall. But at the same time, do you do it this way? I mean, he was actually fired while he was overseas.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure he's
It's about having the upper hand, and this is a way to ensure.
Why does he call the guy in the office or the woman in the office and say, you know, it's not working out. I'd like you to resign.
Because I think he likes to humiliate people to elevate himself. It's been clear he's done it over and over again.
I have to disagree. I'm not sure getting a text or a tweet that was broadcast to the entire American people saying you did a terrific job, thank you very much for what you've done, is a humiliation. I really don't. I think the big difference is we have a North Korea.
Did you watch his face in the room
employers around America don't start firing their employees by tweet.
We have a North Korea summit that's potentially looming, of which there were sharp differences of opinion between the president and the Secretary of State. We have differences over Iran.
What was the difference?
So the difference, well, I think you said 3 or 4 times that at many important junctures when the president was applying pressure to North Korea, it appeared as though Mr. Tillerson was putting that pressure off. That was the perception that was created.
Yeah, but
and the president didn't like it. He has said, the Secretary of State, on news programs, that he has differences of opinion on North Korea and Iran.
No, on North Korea, the Secretary of State.
What are we doing? What are we doing? You're the expert. What do we do in Iran right now if we kill the treaty?
Well, I mean, the president shows every sign of planning to walk away in May, and that was the clearest policy disagreement he had with Tillerson, and it's not one he has with Pompeo. So presumably Pompeo will be on the side now, apparently the winning side, of arguing to the president that he can walk away from the deal without blowing up alliances and without risking.
How do we do it? How do we pull out?
Consistent with what he ran on as president.
He said no more stupid wars.
But he also said this was the worst deal that's ever been negotiated.
Well, what's coming now? A war? Netanyahu would love us to do some bombing over there.
I don't know if the war is coming.
Saudi Arabia.
I don't know if a war is coming, but we can certainly put the pressure on Iran to say.
You think we should bomb Iran?
I'm not saying we should bomb Iran, but
do you think it's a good idea to think about it?
Well, you know what? I think that option on the table, and I have to be honest with you, I think that option on the table is an important option.
You think that's an active war?
Well, in 5 years, we're going to be faced.
It's an active war. You want to come in and go to war with Iran?
Well, Israel bombed Iraq.
You want to go to war with Iran?
I'm not sure I want to go with the war with Iran, but I'm not sure that's the only option for Iran.
I think if you bomb them, they'll think they're at war with us. Anyway, the roundtable's sticking with us, and up next, these three will tell me something I don't know. We're back with a Hardball Roundtable. Adolfo's going to tell me something I don't know. I'm waiting.
Oh, well, here's what I'll tell you what you don't know. I think the Democratic Party has blown it with respect to DACA. I think they played their hand with the Schumer shutdown. They lost on it. It's gone to the back burner. And I think the Latino community is not going to show up in the numbers that Democrats
What should we do with those kids who were brought here by their parents?
I think they should be part of a broader comprehensive reform. I don't think they should be done in isolation. I think the kids should remain here, but they shouldn't remain here without a wall.
Look, Chris, you've written a lot about 1968, and this is Women's History Month. Shirley Chisholm was elected the first black congresswoman in 1968, and she said, you know, women should be revolutionary, and if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. That's why I always keep mine in my trunk.
I was with Eddie Bernice Johnson.
Go ahead.
The attention on foreign policy was obviously elsewhere today, but the White House held an unusual 6-hour session with Gulf Arab states, Israel, and others related to the shelved Mideast peace deal. This was about what to do in Gaza. And one hopeful sign about the peace process is that they had this meeting at all and put Saudi Arabia and Israel and others in the same room. A sign of what's wrong with the peace process is that the Palestinians didn't show up.
When are we going to have 50-50 in the House and the Senate, men and women?
Oh, my gosh, 2050?
Well, I think it's coming. It's working its way. It's working that way. Anyway, Adolfo Franco, former U.S. Congresswoman Donna Edwards, and Ann Guerin. When we return, let me finish tonight with Trump Watch. You won't like it. You're watching Hardball. Trump Watch, Tuesday, March 13, 2018. Donald Trump promised to stop stupid wars. We knew, or thought we knew, that he was talking about wars in the Islamic world, 3 of which we'd had under the Bushes, all 3 of them backed by too many Democrats, including the Clintons. You see, the political establishment seemed united on one issue, these stupid wars Trump was promising to stop. So someone should explain to us now why the man who ran against stupid wars is stirring up trouble again with Iran. Let's be serious about this. There were 2 ways to stop Iran from pursuing its nuclear weapons program. One was the deal we got with the world to stop them. The other was bombing them, the way being pushed by the hawks here and in the Middle East. So what in the world does Donald Trump think is going to come of tearing up the nuclear treaty with Iran now? What's his alternative to stop Tehran from continuing on its path to a nuclear-armed Iran? If it's bomb Iran, that is precisely what people voted against who voted for Trump. War has been the political establishment's answer in the Mideast. It's been the neocon strategy. It's what Americans voted against ever since W. It's what an awful lot of Trump voters voted against when they listened to him attack stupid wars and voted their agreement with him. Whatever happened to that, Donald Trump? And that's Hardball for now. Thanks for being with us. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.